Welcome to the Digital Responsibility Podcast. There is a vibrant community around the world exploring how we drive forward digital innovation, products and services, and generally exploit technology progression for the sustained benefit of society and the planet. On this podcast, you will hear from me, Christopher Johnson, and Rob Price, two of the original founders of Corporate Digital Responsibility, as we speak to our guests to hear their stories and piece together what it means to be responsible in the digital age. If you'd like to learn more, take a look at the website, corporatedigitalresponsibility.net.
Excellent. So I'm really excited tonight. It's the last episode of season 4 of the Digital Responsibility Podcast. And we have to go with the topical kind of conversation around generative AI, large language models, and some of the amazing things that can be done, as I'm sure lots of us that are listening will have played with ChatGPT and others and seen the things that can be done, but also some of the concerning sides of how do we ensure that there's an ethical guidance in understanding what we need to consider on that journey. I'm delighted to be joined by two guests, Chris and Sean. I did set off by thinking what would be the best introduction and went into ChatGPT and tried to get a variety of styles of introduction to kind of kick things off, from Tolkien to Beatrix Potter. But I decided we'd just go with the straightforward. Well, Sean, tell us a bit about you. Perhaps we should define what a large language model is and then why it's important to your business. And then Chris, we'll come to you next.
Sure. Yeah. Look, thanks for that, Rob. So my name's Sean Williams. I'm the chief executive at AutogenAI. We are using large language models and other technology to help organizations with their corporate pros. So specifically to write bids, tenders, proposals, and other marketing copy. So that's me.
And Sean, just recognizing that not everyone will kind of be necessarily familiar with things like ChatGPT or large language models or generative AI. What does it mean to you, just as a kind of very much a starter for 10?
Yeah, so we are very used to computers being able to add up faster than us. And actually, as human beings, we've got used to that. They can add up faster than us. They can multiply faster than us. But I spent, kind of the best part of 2 decades as a writer. And I spent my undergraduate days and then those decades I spent as a writer telling anyone who would listen that computers would never be able to conquer human language because human language was uniquely part of our makeup. And then 18 months ago, a friend of mine, Andy, who works for DeepMind, told me that I was completely wrong and they'd built something that was able to write language. And I told him not to be silly. Of course they hadn't. And then I looked and large language models, which are essentially a big neural networks. So I think of them as kind of artificial brains. So 3 things changed with why computers couldn't do language and now they can. One is the brains got bigger. So just Moore's law type, they got more powerful. 2 is they read more. So they've got this training data, modern large language models, these big neural network brains. They pretty much read everything that's ever been written and certainly everything that's ever been digitized. And the third thing was the way those brains were constructed. So the underlying architecture. In 2017, a paper came out called All You Need Is Attention by primarily a group of Google engineers. And that changed the architecture of those neural nets. So size, training data, and this change in the way that the architecture was constructed, that suddenly created this emergent property of being able to write sentences and paragraphs. And it is truly remarkable. So that's what a large language is and what a large language engine does. So computers can't just add up faster than us now. Now they write faster than us as well.
And I think, to that point earlier of asking you to do it in different styles or tones. It's not just writing language, it's writing language as others have done before. At the weekend, I was sat with my mum looking out over a snowy garden full of pigeons. And I said, are you familiar, as you do with your 80 kind of plus year old parents, are you familiar with large language models? No, she said. And we got it to quickly write a poem about the pigeons in the garden, which kind of gave us a number of immense giggles. That's harmless fun, of course. So, Chris, over to you. Bit of background about yourself. And I guess you're the other side of, still recognize the value of what can be done, but making sure that it's not migrating into the the harms and the negative side of things?
Sure. Thank you for having me, Rob. And great to be here, having this conversation with yourself and Sean. So just a bit about my background to set the perspective in why I think and my perspective of this subject. So I've got about 3 decades of experience across financial services, software, data, consulting, and GRC. And of that time, about 2 decades in GRC. So, and most of my career is in the intersection of technology and business. I'm a technologist at heart, but obviously, extracting value from technology. So, and both sides, client and vendor. So, and also my experiences in large, complex global organizations, mostly financial services, have given me an understanding and appreciation of the intricacies, interconnectivity of business functions, as well as the dynamics and cultures within these global organizations that support or hinder performance, change, transformation, etc., etc. And I look at my lived experiences, and I use the analogy of, I went for an eye test last weekend, and you know how when you go for the eye test, they put the lenses on. So when you sort of take each lens, and then you sort of, I've got a technology lens, business transformation lens, and then the GRC lens. So when you put all of that together, I see the world through those lenses, and I see, because of the GRC aspect, I see the risk, right, from using emerging technologies that I think most people don't see because they're just purely using them to solve problems, right? Whereas I've got that different perspective. So and because of that, right, I write the articles that I write, I give that perspective. And also the other hat I wear is I'm also part of ForHumanity, which is a non-profit charity, and it's basically crowdsourced. It's I'm a fellow there. I'm a certified auditor, and I'm also on the ethics committee. We can talk about ForHumanity later in much greater detail. So going back to your question, the flip side of innovation, is really to bring in risk management, bringing governance, because a lot of these technologies, I call them non-deterministic. So in the olden days, when we were much younger, and when I was cutting code, we're dealing with deterministic technology. So when you program something, right, in a particular way, you put in a logic, it's going to come out. These technologies that we're dealing with are because they're probabilistic. You cannot guarantee you're going to get the same results every single time. And because of that nature, it's loaded with risks, right? And so if developers don't see that the downsides of those potential outcomes is going to put the consumers of the outputs, potentially within the side of harm. And so when I talk about responsible innovation, I talk about governance, I talk about risk management, I talk about the whole relevant legal frameworks. So if you're in a particular jurisdiction and you're bounded by those regulations and laws, you need to think about those things as well. So, and when you put all of that together, really the context in which I look at the world is really focusing on what I call socio-technical systems, right? The application of these technologies on people directly. So where these systems embody personal data, they embody humans within them. And so I'm not, obviously a lot of corporates use these technologies to help them make decisions. So when they are experts in the field, the technologies help them in the decision making. So the more decision support, use cases of technologies. For me, they're managing the risk, they bear the risk, the organization bears the risk. But when they start deploying these technologies through socio-technical systems, and these things work autonomously, right? Making automated decisions and profiling, and hence, when they have these risks embedded and not managed, you get all sorts of problems, like we've seen with Bing and ChatGPT, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
So I guess the key thing for me is, and I've talked about it many times, if we look at that from a regulation point of view and the complexity of any organization understanding what all the regulations are in all the geographies in which they operate, plus, of course, regulation takes time. Regulation needs to change. I mean, kind of if we look at the EU AI regs, for example, and the evolution and what counts as high risk, etc. Can we simplify that enough to enable organizations to know what to do, to kind of, do they need to go to a ForHumanity or otherwise set of auditors or a digital ethics advisory board there are great things it can do. We'll come to those in a minute, Sean. So kind of get ready for that one. But how, Chris? How do we enable organisations to know where that line is?
Yeah, so very good question. If you look at a lot of these regulations, right? So the way they're interpreted, the way they apply within organizations or they're consumed, it's through legal and compliance, right? So and then it's basically black and white, tick the box exercises, and that's how they've always been adhered to in the past, right? But when we're dealing with socio-technical systems, we're looking at multidisciplinary aspects, right? You're talking about the social aspects and there's people aspects in it, there's personal data, there's, so therefore you need to look beyond just from a legal and compliance perspective. You need to, and I know that if you look at a typical, technology function within a large bank, for example, or a technology company, I think let's look at a bank, for example, right? The technology function would solve problems. Okay, they will solve problems very efficiently because they understand the technology. They'll use technology, but they're not necessarily thinking about the implications of regulations and how they should be, or the solution should embody adherence to regulations. And when you start adding ethics into the equation, which they need to because of these socio-technical aspects of it, right? They're not doing that because that's not how they're trained. That's not their perspectives of the world, right? Because these are interdisciplinary, it requires, what we call in ForHumanity diverse inputs and multi-stakeholder feedback. So you need to get.
But they don't get. But most businesses don't get that at the moment, do they? I mean, that's the challenge.
Exactly. That's what we're trying to educate them, right? And that's why when we're working with regulators to basically, try and align on our audit criteria. When we talk about diverse inputs and multi-stakeholder, they don't understand that, right? Because that's like you said, it's a new nomenclature, it's a new kind of thinking paradigm. But because we try and embody, those attributes into this, what we call DI and MSF. You need to think about somehow getting diversity of thought, diversity of lived experiences through a representation of the stakeholders for that within the value chain that's going to be impacted by that socio-technical system into the equation, right? So it's into the environment where these things are being developed through its life cycle. Now, it's not going to come from one function. It's going to require a cross-function sort of multidisciplinary team, I would say, right? Or collaboration. And that's, you need to then look at internal stakeholders, external stakeholders. Basically, if you chart out the entire, all the list of stakeholders in the value chain, this is what people need to think about. You got to think through it, right? And it's complex and it's not simple.
Yeah, absolutely, and probably kind of it's too complex. So let's flip it round and let's come at it from a different angle. So I saw a tweet the other day by Dean Hinchcliffe, so a key Twitter influencer. I'm sure a number of us follow him, and he was getting quite excited about, does this act as a potential solution for the perennial problem for every business, which is internal knowledge management? It never knows what it's got within the business. Now, Sean, when we had a demo of kind of your solution, that was the bit that shone through for me. I suddenly kind of thought, hey, kind of, does this give me the ability to solve one of the biggest problems that I've got, which is to efficiently and effectively play my best corporate kind of card in winning this bid? That's what that's your use case, isn't it, effectively?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's all sorts of things that you can do with large language models. So a lot of people are focusing on the generative power of them. But the other really interesting part about large language models is their semantic power. So at the moment, if you wanted to look through a corpus of text or knowledge in a business, you might do it on a keyword search. And indeed, most even kind of very sophisticated search organizations like Google were essentially using keyword search. What large language models enable us to do is encode semantic meaning into very big mathematical matrices. So you can look at the meaning of a sentence and then search for that meaning elsewhere it might occur in the organization. So, if we're helping an organization, a charity that helps ex-offenders find jobs and works in prisons. The language in some of their papers might be around reducing recidivism, but the word recidivism isn't used kind of much at all in kind of sort of modern helping offenders. We talk about reducing offending. But if you type reducing offending into a large language model, it will be able to semantically find then documents with recidivism, because it knows the meaning of what you're asking for. So that's a really, really simple example. But where you say, I want a case study from Australia of where our organization has done X, in a way that was incredibly hard to then go and find that model. Indeed, you had people, I was talking to the corporate development director of a major international technology company. She's on a big 6-figure salary, and she spent 2 weeks trying to find a particular certification that their business had got. Now, a large language model with a library can do that for you in seconds. So absolutely, as you say, Rob, what we're doing with our technology is twofold. One is using this enormous power of semantic search to do knowledge management in a transformatively different way to it could be done 18 months ago before the tech really got these emergent powers. But two, then, when you've found that information that you wouldn't have been able to find before, it would have taken you a long time, you can now do it in seconds. You can then repurpose that information using the generative power of large language models. So I found that case study from Australia, but it was talking about helping a private sector customer. I now want to talk about how we do that in the public sector. The large language model can just rewrite that for you and put that into an email, put that into a proposal, or put that into a LinkedIn post. And really that power, that technology, that speed improvement is remarkable. And we talk a lot about innovation being about speed improvement. So, the abacus allowed people to add up and multiply faster, but that enabled more complex trade. The printing press enabled people to share ideas faster, but that enabled the Renaissance, the Reformation, and 99% literacy rates, and all of those other kind of profound changes that come from speeding up.
And I think if I kind of look at it through the lens of a CXO or a partner in a consulting business, then that story of enabling my team to be more effective. I still remember when we did the demo, kind of the colleague, Ollie, kind of said, I could probably do my job in 1/8 of the time. That was quite exciting from his point of view. And especially at a time post-pandemic, struggling to get people burnt out in terms of kind of people are running kind of flat out, etc. That thing about doing things faster, accelerating, that's an attractive sell. Now, at the same time, I know from experience of playing around with not AutogenAI, but in terms of ChatGPT, is it has this wonderful hallucinatory kind of ability to make things up. So I guess kind of I'm then thinking, right, I'm doing a bid into government, for example, yeah. and I've got this kind of text generated. How do I know it's right? Because I know some of the, and as I say, it's not a comment on your show, and it's just kind of what I've seen in terms of ChatGPT is it's not yet right.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and it plays actually into. I want to kind of refer back to some of what Chris has said, because I think he's absolutely spot on. So let me start from the generative power of large language models is remarkable because it's generative. It makes stuff up. Making stuff up is a feature, not a bug, right, of generative large language models. That's what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to make stuff up. If I want to go and find facts, I'll do a search. I'll do a Google search. I'll go to Wikipedia, and I'll be very careful about where my sources are. So one is I would start from, you just need to be very honest and use the right tool for the job. So if you want to write a poem about pigeons, if you want to take some facts and turn them into a LinkedIn post, then you can use generative AI from the facts or generative AI from the pigeons. So one is, so we call that the discovery route. You take some facts and you use a large language model to take those facts and repurpose them. That way you don't get hallucinatory type problems. The second way that we do it is you allow the large language model to make something up, and it will then make up a case study or will then make up a statistic. Now you use the semantic search powers of large language models to look up that made up statistic or look up that made up case study in an organization's body of actual case studies and actual statistics, and you return the closest semantic actual fact to the one that is made forward. So let me just round that off by saying, one is that's how responsible software uses humans and large language models and search in order to make sure that things aren't hallucinatory. Two is there then a problem if you weren't doing that responsibly and you just hooked up a large language model to automatically respond to Facebook posts, or automatically respond to Twitter? Or I have to say, probably the stupidest application of a large language model I ever saw, getting it to write scientific papers when Facebook decided to get Galactica to do that. I mean, that to me is completely irresponsible and takes away from the fundamental piece around generative AI. When large language models are used to do generative AI, is the point is it makes stuff up. So you have to, as a human, have human checks on that then generated text and factual checks, because that it is a feature, not a bug. It makes stuff up. But if you then let it write scientific papers, it will be nonsense. There will be no empirical basis for that. It's just randomly picking words based on previous words. That's how large language models work. They're not searching facts. If you want to search facts, use Google. Google's really good for that.
It's a brilliant point, because of course when ChatGPT was launched, there was all that well, it's the Google killer, but as you say, they do different things. So Chris,
I can't believe people think of it. Sorry, I'm sorry, but I can't believe people are using large language models for search. I think it's an incredibly silly use case. It's only because it's so big, right, and people make so much money from it. But it's large language, like generative use of large language models is not a use case for finding facts. We've already got a very good way of finding facts. It's a very good way of generating interesting content and ideas. I'm sorry, I've said too much, Rob.
No, that was brilliant. So Chris, I wanted to kind of look at another use case. So you mentioned kind of financial services as a background in terms of your career, and it's an interesting one for me because I've done some primary research in terms of that area around use of AI and how people are concerned or not about the ethics of AI. I was chatting with somebody the other night, and they were looking at using large language models to power chatbots in financial services organizations, and were gushing about how effective and realistic it was in terms of that conversation. Now, again, I appreciate that as a use case, but equally, I'm also slightly scared about that in the sense of letting it loose on end consumer and how that operates. So talk to me a bit about financial services. I mean, I've even seen some organisations just ban them at the moment, haven't I? In terms of well, we're not using that because it's just too much of a risk.
Absolutely, and there was a press release, I think a report that JP Morgan's banned it, right? So I'm not sure if, and then other banks have followed suit. But yeah, going back to the chatbots, and I'll talk about financial services in a different light for a sec, but I just want to go back to your chatbot thing. I remember, I mean, we all have used chatbots on any of these sites, right? Websites where it's all self-service, because that was a cost-saving initiative. And they put a chatbot in there instead of a human, and we get frustrated because when you have a real problem, you raise it with the chatbot, it doesn't understand what what on earth you're talking about, and it goes into a loop, right? It went from a very, very dumb chatbot to then if they start plugging in, the chat GPTs and variants, and it depends on where they source the information from, right? I mean, going back to Sean's point, if you have a closed loop and you control the information, right, then you can potentially control the quality, provided that you don't let anything else in. But if the universe of knowledge is the internet, right? Can you imagine the behaviors that it will get up to, and then the consumer will experience very, very similar experiences as they do now with Bing and ChatGPT, right? So who knows which way they're going to go? But going back to financial services, my understanding, just talking to many people within those banks, is that when they use non-deterministic algorithmic technologies, I don't like to use the word AI because I don't think they're intelligent at all. They're basically machine learning, right? So they where they're used, they're used for very specific use cases, and they usually, well, not usually, they probably have model risk management teams that manage the model risk. Okay, so they because banks are highly regulated, right? So they will want to ensure that the risks within those models don't get out of hand. So they invest in resources around there. But where I see the biggest exposure in any organization, including the banks today, are where these technologies are embedded in third-party applications. HR, your workplace management, all your CRMs, ERPs, where they have these things and the vendors haven't disclosed them, right? Because they've been there for years and years and years. These institutions are invariably onboarding risks that could become business risks, right? Because the governance functions might not know about them, right? And hence they're not actually, managing the risks around them and mitigating any potential, issues that can arise. So that's where, because I've spoken to people in model risk management, and they bring up the use cases of AI in HR, in HR and in recruitment, and they say that's all shadow IT. Now they obviously outside of their remit, they put it aside. But then you ask the question: who's actually managing them? Who's governing them? I don't think there's anybody doing that. So that's the biggest exposure I see, is the use of these technologies in third-party applications, services, and platforms.
And it's something that we talked previously on the podcast about, even the last one actually, where we were talking with Joe Toscano in the US around tracking data through the supply chain, talking about the Software Materials Act, and talking about same for algorithms. So absolutely, how many organisations have done that today? Probably very few. Talk to me a bit more though about how you see it evolving, because I'm very conscious of the pace of change. And again, Sean, I remember the slide kind of that your colleague had on the screen that kind of just talked about the rate of change and progress in the last 3 years is phenomenal. So where are we going to be in the next 5 years in terms of what are the significant events going to be, both from a innovation and at finding those kind of perfect use cases to kind of really solve some of the big problems that are out there, but Chris, equally to think about some of those increasing ethical challenges and how we get that right balance.
Yeah, so I used to say something new and exciting happens in this space every 2 weeks, but I was wrong. It's about every 2 days. As we've been speaking, GPT-4 has just been released, so my developers are kind of getting on to see how much better that is than DaVinci GPT-3, and how much better it is than the Chat GPT kind of models. So this really is a space where things are happening very, very fast. But again, and I just totally agree with Chris actually about how artificial intelligence is kind of a misnomer in most cases. Large language models are remarkable. They can put together sentences and paragraphs that are grammatical, that are compelling, that are often true, sometimes false, sometimes whimsical, but they have no judgment. They simply don't know whether a sentence is true or false that it's created. They've just randomly picked. Kind of exactly what Chris has described. It's a stochastic kind of non-deterministic process. So I think the speed improvement in producing language, when coupled with human judgment, guidance, and driving, is going to be as transformative as the internet was. I think just that speeding up of creation of content and creation of ideas is going to be remarkable. But I also feel that a lot of people have got a vested interest in either overhyping for good or bad what these models can do and what they can't do, and kind of are we 2 months away from artificial general intelligence? No, and I don't think we're even close, and I don't think large language models represent a way of getting there, because there's simply just stuff they can't do and have no capabilities of doing. And I simply don't believe making them bigger and more powerful will allow them to get there, because I think there's something conceptually missing from what they can do, which is judgment. But what we will see is certainly their ability to write longer form prose, to as I think GPT-4 can now take 30,000 words in as input. That's remarkable. The stuff you're going to be able to do in summarization, the stuff you're going to be able to do in kind of contextually understanding paragraphs of understanding I use in heavy inverted commas, right? The ability to pull out information as though there was understanding, which there isn't, can speeding up humans' ability to comprehend and understand. I think that's also going to be very exciting. For me, very exciting. I'm an entrepreneur. With them, and Chris is absolutely right to say also, something which should definitely be concerning regulators and legislators, and will need appropriate checks and balances. But I'll let Chris talk to that.
And I think, I'm really interested in the internet point, because I remember kind of talking about 10, 15 years ago, we used to talk about born in the web businesses and what would the web do? What was that digital mindset for a traditional business? How do you get into that space of what would the web do? So I guess now we're talking about what would the large language model do? It comes back to that different mindset when you're setting up that disruption. I guess, my background was payments. So I remember reading Brett King's Bank 4.0, looking at the challenger banks versus the traditional banks. So I'm almost imagining Bank 5.0 as if I was setting up a new financial institution with this at the heart, rather than having to transform that legacy. Would it be different? Would it work? Chris?
Well, I think
you're shaking your head. So you're thinking it's too hard in a regulated environment.
Well, I think, obviously regulations are coming, right? I think, they should come quicker, but unfortunately they'll take time. Obviously the big tech's lobbying to water down a lot of these regulations as well. The thing is, regulations are much needed, right? Because of what we're seeing happening with ChatGPT and how they deployed. I think, let's be accurate about the use cases here, because I think if you're responsible and if you understand the risk and you do it right, or then I think the outcomes could be manageable, right? As opposed to people are just using this willy-nilly and empowering bad actors to do what they want with it. But I think what's going to happen, right, over the coming short term, medium term, is that regulations will come in. And then it's going to force, behavioral change within organizations, especially regulated. I see a lot of these regulations are going to call for independent audits, and you need them, because obviously, this whole, you saw Gary Marcus's post out there today, right, about misinformation, and it's a big problem. It will be a big problem, right? Because these tools are, I wrote somewhere, that these are mischievous genies that have been let loose out into the world, right? And they're not toys, but weapons of mass misinformation, right? And so what's going to happen is society is going to start losing trust in a lot of these technologies and what potential outcomes they're going to provide, right? So and I think, the whole trust factor is going to drop, right? And people will be suspicious about, if somebody goes out there and say, I've got AI, right, in my services is powered by this, and I think it's going to have an opposite effect, because I think there'll be less organizations putting that label AI on beside the wares, and a lot of them will probably not disclose it, but they have to. Regulations will require them to disclose it, and also this being able to disclose the limitations and risks will require them to then implement risk management governance, because otherwise you won't know what to disclose, right? And I think that's going to drive behavioral change. But then you're always going to have the tension between, and you saw this Microsoft firing the ethics team, right? The tension between making money and the tension, and doing it right. But I think that, the belief is that you can't make money if you do it right. I disagree with that. I think if you do it right, because fast forward in a few years or maybe a few months, right? I see that trust is going to be the currency for engagement, right? Because there's so much distrust out there at the moment, or there will be more. And so if people don't trust your platform, they will not engage with you. And if you don't get engagement, there's no business, right? So this is more B2C rather than B2B, okay? And that's I think that's gonna be where we're gonna head to in terms of outcomes. Is that so the question then becomes, how should an organization, right, use these technologies so that they can be trustworthy? That's a question that I believe, if they embrace responsible innovation, it kind of like get your house in order, right? First, submit yourself to an independent scrutiny, which is the audit, and then you get your certification by somebody else. Don't mark your own homework, right? And then you can then display that label, right, to say that, okay, we've been independently audited. We're doing things right, and then you can trust us, because it can't be blind.
And I think the trust is so core to everything, and in a sense, I guess kind of we are talking about digital responsibility, so trust first principle, it's core to everything. And I do have a worry in terms of, will organizations go through that audit process? Can they afford to go through that audit process? Whoever is providing that, versus, is there any way to automate some of this? I mean, there's a couple of you said earlier, Chris, we'd come back to ForHumanity. So kind of let's do that before the end of the podcast. So tell us a bit about ForHumanity's approach in terms of what they're trying to do, because I'm very conscious, as I've talked previously on the podcast, it's not as though there's a mass capability out there all ready to be deployed across all those organizations to help them prove that they're doing things in an appropriate and ethical way. So why don't you share a bit about what Ryan Carrier and the team are trying to do?
Sure. So ForHumanity, as an organization, is building an infrastructure of trust. And what that means is that there are four core tenets to that. One is that ForHumanity as an organization produces accessible binary certification criteria. So basically, and these are linked to the relevant legal framework. So for example, we've got one for GDPR, UK, and GDPR EU. So there's a slight difference between the two. We've done one for EU AI Act, obviously subject to change. We're starting one for the Digital Services Act, EU. We've done one for the New York City AEDT, Automated Employment Decision Tools, and there's one for CCPA, which is California, right? And there's others. So we've got teams around the world. There's a team India doing one for Team Australia, and so forth. So we are about 1,300 globally. So we are a social, I guess, a network, and all it does is it produces criteria, right? So this criteria has to be maintained as they change, and ForHumanity will do that. Okay, that's the first tenet. Secondly, ForHumanity ForHumanity actually teaches how you audit through this criteria. So it's set up like a ForHumanity University. Basically, is a training program, and anybody can register and take up the training. It's free. Okay. So and Ryan teaches that, okay? And at the moment for the EU AI Act, we started we're in week 2 now, and at EU AI Act there's about 4 different people teaching it, different parts of it. And then obviously that's a 8-week course, and when you finish a course, you sit the exams. Now exams, you got to pay for it, okay? So there's a cost to the exams, and if you pass the exam, you're certified FHCA for that particular scheme, okay? Which means that you've attained a level of competency for that. Now, behind the scenes, there are body of knowledge that we, ForHumanity, crowdsource again, and these are all voluntary. We will create body of knowledge, so BOKs. I'm the owner for necessity assessment. And so I've got people, so I basically coordinate, bring people together, and we refine it, we update that, and it will get published on the website. So there are BOKs for various parts of, of the taxonomy that that will help auditors get into the detail, right? In terms of how if you go into a necessity assessment, what do you look for, right? And what's a sufficient state and what's a mature state, and so forth, right? So it's much deeper beyond the criteria. And obviously I've got to talk about FHCA. So if individuals that pass the exams will be certified FHCA. So that's the second tenet. Third tenet, certification bodies. So any entity can license this criteria, right? Obviously, there's a licensing commercial agreement for ForHumanity. And when they license the criteria, they can certify the entity. So the entities. So the way the audits work is that when we do an audit, we're auditing on this thing we call target of evaluation. So basically, it's a system, right? It's a what they call AAA system, algorithmic AI. AI algorithmic and autonomous system. Okay, so there's three things, and it covers basically the whole spectrum of these systems: processing personal data, right? And that's the target evaluation. So basically, it's a process audit. So making sure that you are not auditing the algorithm, where you're auditing everything around the algorithm, making sure that there's governance, there's oversight, accountability. There's processes you can actually, as part of, for an organization to pass an audit, they have to have the capabilities that meet the audit requirements. So basically, they have to be able to govern, right? This governance structure is set up. They have to be able to make ethical decisions, right? So you do ethical consideration, ethical decisions, and then obviously you've got processes that I guess any mature or a maturing organization will have to set up, right, to make sure that they can sustain the quality of the outputs that meet these regulatory requirements. So that's and then fourthly, obviously, these schemes need to get the blessing of regulators as well. Yeah. So yeah, and so when you have those four things together, you imagine that we've got teams around the EU, right? And when these things, let's say the EU Commission accepts it, right? Say they say we want to work with ForHumanity, and this will become the standard for audits, right? Then you've got basically the infrastructure set up. You've got the auditors that get being trained through ForHumanity. They get the entities get certified by accreditation bodies. You got the schemes, which are crowdsourced, they're standard schemes. So everybody will use those schemes, and then it can be delivered in a consistent way.
And I'm guessing, I've always seen it as an investment for the future in terms of the putting that infrastructure in place, and because I guess, Sean, my question is going to be, in the conversations that you have day in, day out in terms of organizations buying or buying into your solution, how many of them say, I'd like it, but I need to kind of make sure I get audited at the same time? Is that a question? Do they ask the ethical question when they're buying at the moment?
Yeah, every customer we've spoken to has spoken about the ethical implications. So a few things that consistently come out. One is the hallucination problem. How do we make sure that what we're saying is accurate and consistent with the organization's message? Two, a lot of people have read about bias in AI, sexism, racism. And how do you make sure that you are trying as far as possible to eliminate that from the models? We always get a few people smile and say, is it going to take over our jobs and then take over the universe? Because obviously you can see the power of it, and so I think people really are. I think people absolutely are concerned by the potential ethical implications, and I think there's people, and then there's systems, and then there's incentives, right? And I think the key thing for businesses, individuals working within businesses, then individuals, the processes and systems within businesses to do is, I completely agree with Chris, is to make sure you've got those safeguards in place, and to make sure that those safeguards are independently verified and audited. It's a really I tried to do a bit of work. I couldn't find a book on it. Maybe someone can point me in the direction of it. But I was really interested in the history of regulation in response to new technologies. So, how quickly did regulation catch up with, the steam engine? How quickly did regulation catch up with electricity? How quickly did regulation catch up with radioactivity? How quickly did regulation catch up with the internet? And it's quite difficult to get, or I haven't found a kind of coherent kind of history on that. But certainly from the limited research I've been able to do, regulators are always slightly behind the curve on this. And, you've always got that bit where you've got the entrepreneurs running with technology before the legislators start to understand it and catch up. And I think, kind of something which is running as fast as modern AI is, that's something which obviously you don't want to over-regulate. And you spoke about some of the EU's kind of AI legislation, and I'd suggest regulating things like Bayes' theorem is kind of probably regulatory overreach, but it's a Goldilocks problem. You don't want to go too far and stifle the very real good that this can do for humanity, but similarly, you don't want to let bad actors run away with it and do stuff which isn't for the benefit of humans. So I really don't envy legislators in that space, and so I think it's incumbent on all of us to help legislators. So I actually do think it's the job of entrepreneurs and business people and people buying this software and people working in big business. I think it's the job of all of us to try and make sure that the regulatory environment is the right one. And that, to Chris's point, saying big tech, constantly arguing against regulation, I think that's entirely the wrong approach. People need to be arguing for the right regulation and supporting people to do that. And I'm a bit of an optimist, but I generally think people are good actors. And if you get enough people contributing to that and seeing it as important to contribute to that debate and feeling they're being heard, then you'll get to a better answer on what that regulation should be.
I think it's a great question in terms of the kind of speed of regulation catching up each time. I'm sure there'll be somebody listening somewhere, or at least reading kind of what was published afterwards, who kind of probably comes back with an answer on it. I did write an article actually, which was I'd gone back looking at the history of CSR, and it broadly took 100 years, kind of from first people kind of talking about CSR to actually organisations kind of getting it and reporting on it and doing things. And I'd suggested that maybe we'd only got 10 years around CDR. And whether we're talking about CDR or AI regs or kind of the many things that are incorporated, we need to be a lot faster at actually realising that. So in terms of wrapping up, hopefully there will be people kind of listening in a number of different countries. They'll be doing a number of different roles. Hopefully kind of a majority of those are looking at and listening, thinking, actually, they will be at least trying and understanding, especially kind of with ChatGPT-4 launched today, as you said, Sean, or indeed other products, other solutions. They'll see what difference it makes to them and their job and the way they can operate and how it can help them. And indeed, somebody somewhere in that organization will hopefully also be thinking about what do they need to do differently in terms of supporting that use or sense checking kind of the ethical dilemmas associated with that use. I guess each of you in turn, but what would be the one thing that you would leave the listeners with today in terms of whether it was a suggestion, a recommendation, a book to read, something to consider, something to do differently, but what would you like to leave everyone with as a final thought? Chris, do you want to go first?
Yeah, okay. So I see, if we look at the value chain, right, of the use of these technologies, I see three key players in the value chain that can actually drive change, because we need to drive change, okay? The way things are going, it's the Wild West out there. I think there's more harm than good. I'm not saying everybody's bad, but I think there's more harm than good. So to drive change, we talk about regulators. They're one of the key players because they can set the guardrails, right? Whether or not they enforce it is a different topic of conversation. There's the second key group in the value chain, users. Okay, so one of the reasons why I write the articles is so that to raise awareness, right, of what can go wrong and what's not perfect about these things, if they're not deployed in a responsible way. So if you're a user, make sure you know what you're getting yourself into when you use these tools. Okay, try to understand the risk and be informed before you actually use it. Now, if you're an organizer, and then the third, key player are the organizations that deploy this. I'm not necessarily talking about the big tech. Okay, that's that's a problem for the regulators to solve. I'm talking about the corporations buying these technologies. Okay, so and also potentially building them. So if you're part of an organization using these technologies, right? My advice to everyone there is to find your conscience, right? And ask why, right? Should these things be, especially if they're emerging? I mean, these are non-problem technologies, right? You can't predict what the outcomes are going to. Oh, yes, a prediction for probability, but there's no certainty to that, right? Do your necessity assessment. How are they going to be used? What risks exist? What safeguards need to be in place, right? So this is all part of risk management governance, accountability. Who's responsible for the controls and who's accountable for the adverse outcomes? Now, understand the risk and exposure to your business. If you're not sure what to do, I'm here to help.
Fantastic. And Sean, and I guess your answer will be pick up the phone to speak to kind of either you or the rest of the team. But more generally, kind of what are your final thoughts?
I think you need to get under the bonnet of generative AI and large language models. I think they're going to change the world. And I think that all individuals and then corporations, organizations, businesses, governments, they need to understand these, and the best way to understand them is to play with them, to actually get under the bonnet and have a look. They're not magical, right? They're pieces of technology. Learn how they work, learn their strengths, learn their limitations, and then from a position of knowledge, then you'll be able to make sensible, ethical, and business and corporate decisions. And one way you can definitely do that is by getting a demonstration of AutogenAI software, and we'd be delighted to take you through our safeguards and the power of the tool and what it can do.
Fantastic, and absolutely kind of the right thing that you should have added. It's such an important point, though, to kind of play and to actually experience and experiment and see what they can do. So great to finish with that. Look, I could have kind of talked for another hour at least. So it's been fantastic conversation, fantastic to see the different perspectives. But actually, I think we broadly agree on both the innovative value that it can deliver, but at the same time being a bit cautious about how that's actually adopted. So fantastic conversation. Look forward to the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers,
Great to talk.